Recording in progress.
Honorable members, I take this opportunity to welcome you this morning. We also greet the staff from our Portfolio Committee on International Relations. We are greeting South Africans who have made it their responsibility to have interest in the proceedings of our Portfolio Committee on International Relations and Cooperation using the platforms that are provided by Parliament as part of deepening democracy in our republic. We are also welcoming some of the staff from DERCO who are here to follow the proceedings of our portfolio committee today. We are going to be receiving the input from SALO today on the situation update on the state of peace, security, and human rights within the Southern African development communities. But before we do that, can we have apologies, Lubabalo?
Good morning, Chair and honorable members. We have 3 apologies, Chair. The first one is from Honorable Zuma. She's out of the country. And Honorable Maimane, he's attending Scopa. And Honorable Mishwe is also attending PCO and Police, but he indicated he will join the meeting a bit later. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Lubabalo. Ausdineo, I give this opportunity to you to introduce our presenter.
Thank you, Chairperson, and good morning, Chair and honorable members. Our presenters today are from the Southern African Liaison Office, a think tank in Cape Town, and it's represented today by Mr. Munjozi Mutandiri and Mr. Lwasi Somya. Thank you, Chairperson.
Thank you very much, Ausdineo. Vasu and your collective, you are welcome once more. You are now embedded permanently as part of the infrastructure in this committee. So we welcome you as part of the family members. I hope members have been taking note of what has been happening since the white Afrikaners, 49 of them who I refer to as semi-great trackers, who have gone to the US to continue the lie that white people are being ill-treated here in South Africa. But that's not what we're going to deal with here today. Vasu and your team, I'm giving over to you to do the presentation. Thank you very much, after which we will engage.
Thank you so much, Honorable Chairperson and members of the Portfolio Committee for inviting us to present today. I would like my colleague Munjozi to please present our slides, or if the committee please put up our slides for our presentation. And whilst our colleagues please put up our slides, I would like to introduce our organization, the Southern African Liaison Office. Over the last 20 years, 2 decades, the Southern African Liaison Office has been engaging constructively in dialogue processes within the SADC region, taking consideration both state and non-state actors, and in efforts for us to build consensus on the trajectory at which this region, SADC region in particular, is trying to trajectory. And part and parcel of what we are trying to do is to have both non-state actors and state actors in a conversation on the developmental trajectory, along with the peace and security architecture within the SADC region. And in doing so, we are able to now foster greater consensus in achieving and attaining both SADC Agenda 2035 along with the African Union's Agenda 2063. And keeping in parcel with this, we as a Southern African Liaison Office have been committed in continuing with these dialogues in fostering greater solidarity and greater consensus within the SADC region, whilst upholding and uplifting human rights for the greater region at all. I'm not sure if the slides are up yet so that we can proceed with the presentation. Yet, Honorable Chairperson, maybe technical might help. Oh, there we go. There we go. All right. So, Chairperson, this presentation is an outcome of a number of and series of dialogues we as the Southern African Liaison Office have done over the last number of years, both analyzing both the regional architecture of the SADC region, but also the events that have facilitated how our governments and state actors have responded to these various pressure points. And part and parcel of this is the SADC region historically has been regarded and considered as one of Africa's most stable regions, yet it currently faces multiple security challenges that threaten the relative stability and the well-being of its people. This presentation would outline the current situation and analyze the key threats and propose recommendations for South Africa's role in advancing peace, security, and human rights within the SADC region. So in order for us to understand what underpins the SADC region's response towards instances of instability, we have to understand the SADC peace and security architecture, which falls underneath the broader African Union peace and security architecture. So what is underpinning these various pieces of architecture is the notion of subsidiarity. In layman terms, meaning that the African Union, as the broad institution within the African continent, under it are these various regional economic communities. Now, these regional economic communities are the drivers towards development, industrialization, along with peace and security, as they're the closest towards the countries. Similar to how we have within our national framework in South Africa, we have the local sphere, we have the provincial sphere, we have the national sphere. The local sphere being the driver of development within the South African context, but within an international relations context, especially within the African continent, the regional economic communities, especially in our instance in South Africa, the SADC region becomes the first point of call on instances of instability. And during the process of the creation of SADC in the early 2002, a number of institutions within the peace and security framework were created. And these were underpinned by several pillars. One, as the SADC Organ on Politics, Defense, Security, and Cooperation, established in 1996 as the institutional framework for coordinating policies and security matters. The second being the Protocol on Politics, Defense, and Security Cooperation in 2001, which operationalizes the organ and defines intervention mechanisms within SADC. The other one is the SADC Standby Force as part of the African Standby Force framework, as you know, subsidiarity. So there is a SADC version that duplicates what happens at a larger continental level. And then there's a Regional Early Warning Center for Conflict Prevention and Management within the SADC region. And there's also the SADC Electoral Advisory Council and Observer Missions to promote democratic governance. Right. And these various processes are integrated within the African peace and security architecture, which itself has various aspects and pillars that define it within that framework. For some of the pillars that underpin the African peace and security architecture are the AU Peace and Security Council, the Continental Early Warning System, the African Standby Force, the Panel of the Wise for mediation purposes, and the Peace Fund, which South Africa contributes to clearly. In August 2024, the African Peace and Security Council and the South African Organ on Politics, Defense and Security and Cooperation held the first ever annual joint consultative meeting, marking a significant step in strengthening coordination between the continent and regional peace efforts. This coordination is critical in addressing complex security challenges that transcend national and regional boundaries. And you have seen some of this cooperation manifesting even within the situation in the DRC, where SADC and the East African community had a joint intervention process at a diplomatic level concerning how do we deal with the situation of the DRC, which is which one would assume is a normality within the current framework, but these are new emerging trends that are emerging within the current African and peace and security framework that we're dealing with. However, there are a number of challenges. Despite the comprehensive framework, the SADC peace and security architecture faces a number of challenges. Number one, limited enforcement capacity and over-reliance on member states' political will. As you've seen in the situation of DRC, only 3 countries deployed to that mission, raising concerns on whether or not state actors are committed towards sustaining peace and security within the region. The other aspects, obviously, as the G20 aims at dealing with issues around debt, are resource constraints affecting operational effectiveness. And part and parcel of this, as debt goes higher within the African continent, there's an inability to find peace and stability efforts, especially when you're looking at how expensive rearming the military is, as we've seen in the current presentations. Well, we've heard from the National Treasury. There are a number of resource constraints which hamper the ability of the South African National Defence Force to be tooled in their ability to carry out its peace and security operations within the region. And there's also another element of tensions between member states that impact cohesive responses. You saw that within the Cabo Delgado region, where Rwanda was called in instead of SADC before even SADC was deployed within the Cabo Delgado region, and then also insufficient coordination with international partners. Other aspect is limited engagement with civil society and transition from state security to human security. And part and parcel of the necessity from transitioning from state security to human security is that it also deals with the developmental element that is some of the causalities of instability within the current African context. And we're going to zoom in now on the current situation within the DRC. The Eastern DRC represents one of the most severe security crises in the SADC region. It's characterized by the following: a sustained insurgency by the M23 grouping with significant territorial gains in the North Kivu province, regional tensions between DRC and Rwanda with allegations of Rwandan support for M23, complex regional dynamics involving multiple armed groups, neighboring countries, a humanitarian crisis with millions of internally displaced persons, and a SADC mission deployment which has faced challenges, and we have seen now it has been recalled currently. The SADC mission in the DRC was deployed in December 2023 with troops from South Africa, Tanzania, and Malawi, with support from the Congolese army, the FARDC. However, the mission has faced significant challenges. One of them is that in January 2025, M23 attacks against some DRC forces resulted in the deaths of 20 soldiers from contributing countries. As of March 2025, the SADC heads of state confirmed that the end of the Summit DRC mandate and initiated a phased withdrawal. The decision to withdraw comes amid continued advances by M23, including capture of key cities like Goma. And part and parcel of the withdrawal that we need to highlight is that the heads of state have highlighted that it will allow for the negotiation processes to unfold, and therefore it is a signal of goodwill. However, the current diplomatic processes carried out by the Donald Trump administration, where he now has pivoted the situation of the DRC from not merely the conflict that we know from what we know concerning people trying to the M23 advances alone. What Donald Trump has perceived it to be is that this is now a chase and a grab towards critical mineral resources within the Eastern DRC. And that's why this peace agreement that he has put on the table is premised on extractions of minerals, peace for minerals extraction. This undermines the other various levels of engagement, such as the East Africa and SADC diplomatic engagement to finding a resolution in the Eastern DRC, along with the African Union's engagement, along with the Qatari engagement. And all these various streams of engagements are now undermined that exist within the African peace and security architecture, and some with external help, now undermined by the major hegemonic actor that has placated his cards within regional and continental dynamics. And then closer to home, the situation in Mozambique. Since 2017, Mozambique's northern Cabo Delgado province has faced violent insurgency by Islamic militant known as Al-Sunna or Islamic State in Mozambique. SADC mission in Mozambique was deployed in 2021, but began withdrawing in 2024. Mixed results with initial success in dislodging militants from coastal strongholds with failure to eliminate the threat entirely. The resurging violence with attacks on coastal communities and military forces as some forces withdraw. Rwanda's expanded role, with Rwandan forces maintaining a presence and Mozambique announcing plans to add 2,500 more Rwandan troops. The humanitarian impact, with hundreds of thousands of people displaced with limited access to assistance. The Mozambique case reveals challenging and sustaining regional security interventions, coordination between different security actors, in this instance between SADC and Rwanda, and addressing the root causing of violent extremism within the SADC region. And part and parcel of this is that we are faced with newer threats now within the SADC region, as violent extremism itself is not a part and parcel of the regional and historic DNA. But now with these new emerging threats, there needs to be a recalibration in the thinking, how do we now deal with these forms of extremism? Adding fuel to the flames are issues around elections within the SADC region. The democratic governance and peaceful transitions of power remain challenges in several SADC countries, with elections often becoming flashpoints for tensions and conflict. Zimbabwe's 2023 elections were marred by controversies and allegations of electoral misconduct. The SADC's election observer mission mechanisms have been criticized for weak responses to electoral irregularities, limited enforcement of the SADC principles and guidelines governing democratic elections, and tensions between democratic principles and non-interference in sovereign affairs. This highlights the need to strengthen SADC's capacity to promote democratic governance and peaceful transitions of power, including more robust election monitoring and enforcement of regional standards. Other threats that are emerging within the SADC region are beyond traditional conflicts. The SADC region faces several emerging security threats. Transnational organized crime, including drug trafficking, illegal resource extraction, and human trafficking, have become the order of the day. Maritime security challenges in Mozambique Channel, along with the Eastern African coast, along with challenges around climate change-related security risks, including resource competition and environmental degradation, flooding, infrastructure damage, and displacement as a result of climate-related disasters. Another aspect is cyber and technology-driven security threats, as South Africa has faced at a state level, where there have been a number of cybersecurity threats impacting both government and business, and also what is fundamentally agitating, especially with the recent release of the unemployment statistics yesterday, is the economic inequality and social unrest that can be fueled as a result of unemployment, inequality, and poverty within our region. Some of the human rights, next slide please. Some of the human rights concerns within the region. SADC continues to face significant human rights challenges that intersect with peace and security concerns, right? So, and part and parcel of that, we should not de-link the notion of civil and political rights from political stability within the SADC region, as we're going to allude to soon. Restrictions of freedom of assembly and expression in several member states have become an order of the day. Repression of political opposition and civil society in some countries have become even codified within law, an example being the situation in Swaziland. Democratic backsliding in certain member states and the violation of electoral rights through manipulation and irregular processes, conflict-related human rights abuses. The protection of civilians in conflict-related areas remains inadequate, particularly within the DRC and the Mozambique situation. Sexual and gender-based violence are utilized as weapons of war in conflict zone, and even in civilian life, as we have with the scourge of gender-based violence within South Africa. Forced displacement of millions of people across the region as a result of climate change and along with conflict within the region, and human rights violation by both state and non-state armed groupings and actors. So these are some of the emerging human rights threats, but there are also socioeconomic rights issues that could lead towards instability. For instance, the persistence of poverty and inequality that undermine human security within the SADC region. as some of the fueling drivers towards the conflict within the Cabo Delgado region. A lot of the areas addressed by the youth were issues around poverty, inequality, and unemployment, especially as they see the extraction of the mineral resources in the Cabo Delgado region, resulting in levels of disillusionment. So that can be an additional fuel towards conflict. Limited access to basic services in many countries, particularly in conflict-affected areas, economic marginalization in certain regions and population groups that contribute to instability, and resource governance challenges related to the extractive industries. And I hope members of parliament are all abreast about President Thabo Mbeki's report on illicit financial flows, especially relating towards extractive industries. But more critically, these human rights concerns impact marginalized groups, especially women and children are disproportionately affected by conflicts and displacements. Refugees and internally displaced people are facing protection challenges, youth, exclusion from the economic and political processes, and ethnic and religious minorities targeted by some conflict contexts. South Africa's role as a regional actor has as you know, South Africa plays a very significant role within the region due to our economic strength, regional infrastructure, our positionality within the continent, along with our set of laws that govern our nation. That sets us with a very important soft power that we need to carry within the region. And in particular, there is particular roles that this parliament can play in enhancing within the region. But let's start off with the state in addressing SADC's peace and security and human rights challenges. The current contributions by the South African government are diplomatic leadership on regional peace and security initiatives, military contributions to peace missions. This includes leading roles in some in DRC and SAMIM, financial support for SADC peace and security mechanisms, technical expertise in mediation, electoral support and governance, the electoral support provided by our IEC, hosting key regional facilities such as the SADC Regional Peacekeeping Training Center. However, there remain challenges and limitations. South Africa faces domestic priorities that are competing with regional responsibilities. As we've seen through the various iterations of our South African budget, there are various resource constraints affecting sustained engagement. There's also an issue of balancing diplomatic efforts with military approaches. There's also tensions between sovereignty and interventions, and these also tensions lay between the notion of sovereignty along with the protocols and treaties that SADC member states have signed on to. The need also for greater policy coherence between domestic policies and regional objectives. And we see this very clearly with the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, where whilst countries have signed onto it, there's very little domestication of that legislation. And in a very important protocol, for example, within the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, for example, it is the protocol on people-to-people movement, which only four countries out of the entire continent have signed on to. So we are making a number of recommendations based on the analysis of the current challenges in South Africa's role, following the recommendations presented for your consideration. For South Africa's approach to SADC, we must strengthen coordinated diplomatic efforts to address root causes of conflict in the DRC and Mozambique. We must advocate for merging mediation processes in complex conflicts like the DRC, where multiple initiatives exist. Especially considering now this Donald Trump initiative that I alluded to earlier within finding a solution within the DRC. So we must be advocating for African solutions for African problems. Balance military and diplomatic tools in addressing regional security threats, enhance South Africa's mediation capacity and support for preventative diplomacy, which will require further resourcing from Parliament, champion increased civil society involvement in SADC peace and security processes, and promote regional responses to climate security and other emerging threats, and strengthen coordination between Parliament and executive on regional peace and security policy. As you know, Parliament has a very important role, as Parliament currently sits on two major continental bodies, one being the Pan-African Parliament and the other one, the newly reformed SADC Parliament. To give teeth towards these initiatives, our South African Parliament needs to advocate for greater strength to these regional institutions. Because ultimately, without Parliament's role in advocating for the strengthening of these institutions, they will continue to bear very little fruits. And for the SADC peace and security architecture, we recommend that we advocate for enhanced early warning capabilities across the region, support for robust implementation of the SADC principles and guidelines governing democratic and peaceful elections, including Parliament's role for advocating for the SADC principles and guidelines governing democratic elections to be converted towards a binding protocol on SADC principles and guidelines governing democratic elections, as to hold state actors accountable when they divert from the democratic norms and principles that underpin our regional peace and security architecture. We must also promote greater integration between SADC and the EU peace and security mechanisms, encourage sustainable funding models for SADC peace operations, support the development of post-conflict reconstruction frameworks within the SADC region, including the creation of a post-conflict fund that is attached towards the SADC disaster fund, and advocate for stronger human rights compliance mechanisms within the security operations of SADC. For specific country situations, for the DRC conflict, we will support for comprehensive political approach that addresses the root causes of the conflict and advocate for transparent management for the natural resources, including the issue of critical minerals and Parliament advocating for a global critical minerals protocol, similar to how the South African government led the Kimberley process. That will be very critical in now the evolving geopolitical order, where critical minerals will now become the source of conflict within our continent and region. We must also promote inclusive dialogue involving all regional stakeholders. On the situation in Mozambique, we must push for coordinated approaches between SADC, Rwanda, and Mozambique government. We must advocate for addressing the socioeconomic grievances in the affected region, especially in the north of the Mozambique. We must also support comprehensive security sector reform within Mozambique. And our SANDF has done a lot of work on security sector reform with various other governments, and I'm sure the expertise will be very helpful in this instance. On elections-related conflicts, we must also strengthen the SADC elections observer mechanisms, and we must also promote early engagement in electoral processes to prevent conflicts. We must also support inclusive dialogue among political stakeholders, and we must also leverage the parliamentary bodies that exist, especially this new SADC, the SADC Parliament, to advocate for the SADC principles and guidelines to be converted to an actual protocol to hold state actors accountable. In conclusion, the state of peace and security and human rights within the SADC region presents significant challenges that require coordinated and sustained responses. While SADC has developed comprehensive frameworks for addressing these challenges, implementation gaps remain and new threats continue to emerge. South Africa, a regional leader, has a critical role to strengthen SADC's capacity to promote peace, security, and human rights. By balancing diplomatic and military approaches, addressing root causes of conflict, and championing inclusive processes, South Africa can contribute significantly to a more peaceful and stable regional environment. The recommendations presented here aim to enhance South Africa's effectiveness in addressing regional challenges while promoting values enshrined in both the SADC Treaty and South Africa's own constitution. Through principled leadership and strategic engagement, South Africa can advance and help peace, security, and human rights across the region. I'd like to end off with quoting from the SADC Treaty, which says that SADC shall promote peace, security in the region, promote the region against instability arising from the breakdown of law and order, develop common foreign policy approaches on issues of mutual concern, and advance such policy collectively in the international fora, and develop peacekeeping capacity and coordinate participation of member states in the international and regional peacekeeping operation. And that is Article 5 of the SADC Treaty. This is especially important to underscore the need for the regional to move as a collective, especially as one, as we face emerging threats, especially during the Donald Trump presidency. The other aspect of the African Union Constitutive Act, Article 3 states that the objectives of the Union shall be to promote peace and security and stability on the continent, promote democratic principles and institutions, popular participation and good governance, and promote human and people's rights in accordance with the African Charter on Human and People's Rights and other relevant human rights instruments. And that is from the African Constitutive Act. And in closing, we wish this Parliament in this deliberations to not only discuss the challenges that are facing the SADC region, but what could be the role of Parliament in alleviating the common challenges facing our region, assisting our government in carrying out a foreign policy that advances peace and security within our region, that is underpinned by the basic norms of human rights, and in particular, human security, in order for us to advance. Because at the end of the day, we will leave this generations for generations to come, and those generations will ask us, what did we do to advance our continent? I thank you. And for further questions, my colleague Mundrozi and I will be available. Thank you so much, Chairperson, for allowing us to present today. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Somia. Honorable members, please note that the chairperson is unable to continue with the session due to a personal emergency, and he has requested that the meeting.
Sorry, Honorable Kumbat, I'm not sure if it's my network, but we're struggling to hear you. Honorable
I can't hear you either.
Yeah, it's the same, Honorable Chair.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Somia.
We can't hear you. Your network is very bad.
Yeah, we can't hear you, Honorable.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me now?
Now it's better.
Okay, no, that's fine. I think I'll just move my iPad closer to me. As I was saying, honorable members, please note that the chairperson is unable to continue with the session due to a personal emergency, and he has requested that I facilitate the session in his absence. With that being said, let me start by thanking Mr. Somia for the insightful presentation. I believe there's much engagement needed, and without wasting time, I'll take hands for members who wish to deliberate on the presentation. Okay, I've noted you, Honorable Nhlongo, Honorable Douglas. Okay, I'll take those hands for now. Honorable Nhlongo, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Honorable Chair. Greetings to yourselves and greetings to honorable members, our staff members, SALO, Lwazi, and South Africans who are watching. Now, Chair, I will first maybe begin from the onset. We must just categorically state that peace in the SADC region and in Africa as a whole remains really elusive for as long as the wealth and mineral resources of this continent are still controlled and benefit those who arrived in this continent with ships. Peace and security remain unattainable. Here at home in South Africa, landlessness, excessive unemployment, inequality, poverty, which of course bears the race black, threatens peace and security. And another thing, Chair, we must not take lightly the deliberate misinformation spread by the US government through President Donald Trump as a country. It has a potential to cause or attract unwarranted attacks or security threats on our country. Now, on the issue of terrorism and insurgencies, peace and security in SADC is central to the region's political stability, economical development, and social well-being. In recent times, the collaboration of the 16 member states quelled armed insurgencies and terrorists in Mozambique, part of Cabo Delgado. This is important to highlight the significance of collaborative efforts to counter terrorism. Terrorist groups in the region, they emerge from an array of complex factors, and opportunism in one such factor, which is sponsored by imperialist elements. Although peacekeeping missions in the northern Mozambique was not a complete success, it must be said that the SADC mission in Mozambique, SAMIM, reduced the capacity of the insurgencies and established a more secure environment. Now, when you look at that, you juxtapose it with a mission in the DRC where we lost 18 soldiers, 14 from South Africa, 3 Malawians, and 1 Tanzanian, who were killed in the DRC. May their souls continue to rest in eternal peace. Summit DRC was a complete failure. Anything contrary to this statement we're making is just to pull wool over our eyes, and we must reject that notion because the continued deterioration of the security situation in the Eastern DRC poses a serious threat to the whole region. It has become necessary that the South African government engages with the member states on a framework for operationalizing the SADC brigade, capacity building, resource allocation, and troop contribution in peacekeeping missions. We cannot afford to continue to place our troops in danger by deploying them without the necessary resources. Now, on the issue of security in the region, Chair, ineffective governments undermine the security of the region. Criminality threatens peace and security. Human trafficking is on the rise within the region, and it's something we really need to look at. Even here at home in South Africa and throughout the region, there's a high rise of cases of human trafficking. Transitional criminals and smuggling of counterfeit goods, drugs, and vehicles pose as a risk to the stability of the entire region. Factors contributing to the deteriorating include rapid migration. Now, political instability in the region caused by election-related conflicts in some countries within the region and violent protests are a cause for concern. People fleeing instability in their home countries are exposed to criminal elements, exploitation, and abuse. I think we have seen in the big cities, like in the city of Tshwane, in mainland, in some big restaurants, and in the main, everywhere in the cities where people who have fled their home country because of instability, they come here to be exploited here in South Africa. Or anywhere else where they move in the region. They get to be exploited. Some are subjected to slavery conditions. A collaborative economic development program is necessary to ameliorate the hardships faced within the region. And leaders must be able to call each other out. It cannot be allowed that former liberation movements, in particular, coalesce to maintain power, much to the detriment of the people. Zimbabwe and Mozambique recent elections are a typical example here in SADC. And really, SADC failed to hold leaders or incumbent governments accountable in their failures to run credible, free, and fair elections. In fact, we are very quick as South Africa to welcome the election results and even attend the inauguration of presidents, while the citizens of Mozambique and Zimbabwe were on the streets protesting, and even state machinery was used to kill and silence a genuine concerned and dissenting voice challenging the election results. So I think it's something we should not do, Church. We just be quick to welcome election results when really there's an outcry from the concerned countries. Now, on the issue of corruption and human rights, this is something very, very critical here. We must call upon member states to condemn blatant disregard of human rights, detention of journalists, suppression of dissenting and excessive use of force against opposition figures. It cannot be that the opposition voices are suppressed in the region and then we expect to have a peace and stability. The regional body must call for the end of the authoritative rule in Eswatini. We must be in solidarity with the people of Eswatini. We must condemn the oppressive regime of Mswati and rally behind pro-democracy calls. Now, you will remember, Chair, Pudemo leaders are exiled here in South Africa. In Eswatini, democracy is not something they enjoy. They are under a monarch government. And it's a cause for concern for us as South Africa and perhaps for the whole region that we are able to host leaders who are exiled here, who are coming from Eswatini, who are chased out of Eswatini for raising their voices in issues of democracy. And we know the pain as South Africa, where we come from, of seeking democracy during apartheid and colonialism, and we don't raise our voices in solidarity with the people of Eswatini and in the whole continent, raise our voices with the people of Western Sahara to ensure that they get freedom and democracy in our lifetime, Chair. That's something that we are really concerned about. Now, there's an issue of corruption. You know, it looks like corruption is a synonym for perhaps African states. It's like it's in a DNA to ensure that governments become corrupt, or it was done deliberately. Colonialism or imperialists made sure that they corrupt our leaders here in Africa to a point where corruption is a synonym for them. Now, corruption has a destructive effect on state institutions. They diverting resources intended for public services such as public health, education, housing, water, sanitation, you name it, disproportional, affecting the poor and the most vulnerable groups. Now, here at home, the highest court in the land has reserved judgment since last year on Phalaphala, and CR17 bank statements have been sealed. Both matters involving the president of the country, Mr. Cyril Ramaphosa. Now, Chair, this erodes public trust. The public cannot trust government, because why there is a secret, why hide Phalaphala, why reserve judgment on Phalaphala, why hide the CR bank statements when the country is concerned, was our presidency bought or not? We must condemn such if we're serious about peace and security in Africa. In conclusion, Chair, peace and security are not optional. It is the bedrock of development, without which stability, economic development, and eradication of poverty remains unattainable. The South African government must intensify collaboration and advance regional integration. Ultimately, a united Africa should be our goal that we must actively work towards achieving. We must, as this committee chair, be able to direct DERCO and Home Affairs, to undesirable persons like those 49 Afrikaners who went to the US to seek refugee status, while there's no reason that warrants that, and they don't even qualify to seek refugee in anywhere in the world, because there is peace and democracy in South Africa. Now, we cannot harbor unrehabilitated racists who have effectively denounced their citizenship, as their plan is to compromise the peace and security of our country. Now, those are the inputs I wanted to make, Chair, in regards to the presentation by SALO. We really welcome their presentation, Chair, and we hope we can have this discussion again in the future once all our troops have come back home, and as we have withdrawn from Summit DRC, and we welcome back all our troops and our assets that have been deployed with them in the Eastern DRC, and we ensure that they have safely returned at home. We hope this item can come back and we discuss that in length and in details, because really we've got a lot to say about our troops in the semi-DRC, but perhaps we don't want to compromise as well their safety in returning, because they still have to cross borders of different countries, and we must call on African leaders who really do not want to see peace in Africa and in SADC. We must call them out and tell them that their love for war or disruption is going to compromise the entire Africa, and really we must never shy out to call out people or any nation that seeks to extract and exploit by looting natural resources and mineral resources of any other African state here in our continent, and as well in the SADC region. So we must not shy away from calling out such acts, Chair. Thank you very much.
No, thank you very much, Honorable Shongo. Honorable Douglas.
Thank you, Honorable Chair. Honorable Chair, fellow members of the Portfolio Committee and representatives of SALO, thank you for the presentation. It was really good. And I want to greet you all in the name of my Father, Yahweh, my Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ, the Holy Spirit, in the language of my people, Kaites, the Kohen San, the First Nation people. Today, as we gather to discuss the state of peace and security, Honorable Chair, we have to look at the human rights and the issues that face all the people of SADC. We are not just talking about statistics and borders or political protocols. We are talking about the lives of African people, everyday people that are at risk, people that are fearing for their lives, people that are currently hiding from people with guns outside, with people coming to their villages, slaughtering them. This isn't just a political exercise. And that's why today my input is going to be as hard-hitting as I possibly can make it. We are talking about communities torn apart by conflict, soldiers left unprotected by budget cuts, and traditional leaders stripped of their rights to protect their own lands and their people. The GNU government sits in this house and claims the legacy of liberation from its ANC partner. Yet it bows to the very institutions that once shackled Africa and to neocolonialism. The IMF and World Bank dictate our budgets, stripping resources from our defense, grounding our planes, and leaving our borders wide open. They are turning our liberation movement into a servitude project. While the DRC burns and Cabo Delgado bleeds, the ANC continues to fund state banquets, global summits, and empty chairpersonships like the G20. And the GNU loves strutting out our people and our presidents to shake hands and kiss babies and cut out ribbons. But what about the babies that are being killed across the border? What about the villages, the women that are being raped there, the people that are being killed every single day in places like the DRC? While our South African National Defence Force troops are left vulnerable, they are under-resourced and our coastlines are unguarded and our soldiers are sent into conflict zones without even the basics of protection. You know, how can we explain, and can the minister actually explain why the SANDF's budget was cut by nearly 30% over the past 3 financial years under the ANC's austerity measures, while our soldiers are sent into conflict zones like Cabo Delgado and the DRC without proper air support, protective gear, or even basic supplies? We have 26 Gripens, and I think there's only 12, if I'm not correct, that are currently not even operational. They're working, but we haven't had the air support that we've needed in our conflict zones, and this has led to people dying on the ground, our troops dying without the right air support. Where's our Royfox? Where's our air dominance in SADC? We don't have it, and it's because of these austerity measures and because of the lack of heart that our leadership has had for 30 years for the caring and for the help and for the needless that are busy suffering. We cannot think of ourselves as isolated from the conflict zones in SADC. We are part of SADC. Yes, we're the southernmost tip of Africa, but the conflicts are happening a few hundred kilometers away in some parts of South Africa from where we are, a few thousand kilometers away from where we are. If we continue on this trajectory and there's a southward push by one of the militant groups and they get some serious funding from the conflict diamonds and other things that they're busy taking out the rare minerals in places like Eastern DRC, or if they push southward with new firepower, with new strength, they could run all the way through to South Africa, and there's nothing that we can do about it because we have failed to protect the South African people by equipping a defense force. We don't live in a first world country. We don't live in a country that like America that's isolated from the world as a continent. We live under and in a conflict zone. And we have left our borders porous, and we've left ourselves vulnerable to the southward expansion of militant groups, even Islamic groups that have come south, like in Cabo Delgado. Why are we leaving our SANDF and our people exposed? So how does this government expect SANDF to protect our borders and secure SADC peace missions when our Air Force remains grounded due to budget cuts? You know, Mr. Chair, if we look at the ongoing turmoil in Democratic Republic of Congo, it's not an isolated incident, but a systemic and symptom of failures. This ANC-led government's passive stance and lack of decisive intervention have allowed external forces to exploit the DRC's resources, leaving its people in perpetual suffering, the interests of the elite. But it goes deeper than that. ANC's commitment to the IMF and World Bank conditionalities has left our peacekeeping forces underfunded and under-resourced. While the government signs declarations and attends summits, our SANDF is grounded literally. We need to advocate for a pan-African resource sovereignty framework to ensure that African resources benefit African people. We need to establish a community defense brigade under the Pan-African Peace Initiative with sustainable funding from mineral royalties, not from Western loans that create debt that is unsustainable and sells out the future of our children. We need to immediately restructure the South African National Defence Force budget to put planes back in the skies and ensure our troops are equipped and protected and South Africa's borders are protected and safe, and that we do participate in peacekeeping efforts outside of our borders to manage conflicts away from our own borders. If we manage it in the SADC region and we help them to protect them from these various threats and from these military coups and military interventions in places like DRC and Mozambique, by protecting them there, we're stopping that violence from coming towards South Africa. It only makes sense that we protect, that we help our neighbors as Pan-Africans, and we also make sure that we stop these insurgencies from having opportunity to coming all the way down to our borders, because right now, if they push southwards, I doubt whether we can protect ourselves of the state that our forces are in. We need to make sure that the government declares that it will break ties with its IMF and World Bank austerity measures that have crippled our national defense, especially because it talks about our national sovereignty and our protection of all South Africans, regardless of race, regardless of political affiliation. If there's an insurgency that comes from the north through and presses through Mozambique or presses through the DRC and comes to our borders, who will suffer? It's not just going to be black South Africans or colored South Africans or Khoisan. It's going to be all of us, white people included. So we have to re-look at how we do this, and we must make sure that we are defending our poor and our vulnerable. As President Jacob Zuma said many times, a nation that cannot defend itself is a nation that is still in bondage. Now, Mr. Chair, the insurgency in Cabo Delgado underscored the dangers of prioritizing foreign investments over local communities. With this government's alignment with neoliberal austerity has marginalized indigenous populations, leading to unrest and displacement. South Africa has repeatedly underfunded SADC missions, leaving our Mozambican brothers and sisters vulnerable to terrorist groups, while South African corporations profit over their gas fields. And here I want to go into the presentation around the electoral integrity in SADC, and we really feel that here we have a lot lacking, Mr. Chair. The ANC's failure to uphold democratic principles in the region has emboldened autocratic regimes. By turning a blind eye to electoral malpractices, the ANC undermines the very foundations of democracy. Now here, we as Umkhonto weSizwe, we ourselves are a victim of electoral fraud. Our votes were stolen in the last election, and we'll completely say that every single time. So we understand what it's like to be now an official opposition without having a free and a fair electoral result. But we decided to stay in the democratic dispensation, to fight within the system, so that we can prove to people that we are not animals as black South Africans, as Africans who are aboriginal to this land, who come from here, who are indigenous to this land. This is our land, and we will fight for it, and we will bleed for it, and we'll die for it if necessary. Billions are spent on state business and international summits and diplomatic handshakes, while our electoral oversight bodies are underfunded and our troops are left defenseless in conflict zones. We must establish an independent Pan-African Electoral Commission to oversee and ensure free and fair elections across the continent. We must redirect funds from fruitless expenditure into election security and community empowerment projects. And we must make systems that ensure that we cannot be defrauded both here in South Africa and SADC as opposition parties or as parties in general. We need to make sure that our electoral machinery is free and fair for everybody. The SALO presentation touches on organized crime and maritime insecurity, but the reality is much darker. Our coastlines are unguarded, our borders are porous, and our South African National Defence Force is crippled by budget cuts imposed by these austerity measures. Illegal mining, drug trafficking, and worse, human trafficking and human smuggling flourish because our naval defences are grounded. The ANC government has cut defense budgets to meet IMF targets while organized crime syndicates run rampant. And our people are the victims. And our children are the main victims because they get smuggled at a young age for sex. They get smuggled for their blood and for their organs. And we cannot leave our children to be vulnerable because we want to obey other finance institutions' austerity measures. We must use our resources to be able to beneficiate them here in South Africa. We must own the value chains. We must send out and export finished products, give our people jobs, and make sure our people are safe. That's the only way we're going to change the situation. And when our people own the resources, own the land, we can use the resources in the land to put safety measures in place that will protect our people from these organized crime syndicates. We need to make sure that we have establish a Pan-African resource protection force led by traditional leaders and community councils. And we must reinstate South African National Defence Force naval operations with proper funding. We must cut IMF debt servicing and reinvest it in border protection and maritime security. We must nationalize critical mineral sectors and direct revenues into local community trusts. The marginalization of the Khoi and San and other African Aboriginal and Indigenous communities is a glaring indictment of the ANC's governance, and especially now under the GNU. We have land dispossession, cultural erasure, and economic exclusion continue unabated across the South African development community. This is a problem for South Africa. It's a problem for Mozambique, Namibia, Zimbabwe, because the First Nation, Khoi and San, the Kam, the Korana, the Griqua, the Gorin-Naikwa, we are across SADC. We're not just in South Africa. And there are billions spent on international summits and global performances while our communities of First Nation people, Aboriginal people, live in abject poverty, live in exclusion. This is a continued genocide against our people. And we want the South African government to do something about it, Mr. Chair. We need to stop this cutting of our social services and freezing of positions like doctors and nurses and policemen because of these austerity measures. Now, in closing, Madam Chair, I just want to address something that wasn't raised by myself, but it was raised by the Chair before he left. And this is the myth of white genocide and the reality of the inequality that is faced by our people. You know, in recent days, we have witnessed the departure of 49 Afrikaners from South Africa, and we're branding them as the 49ers. And they have rebranded themselves as victims of so-called white genocide. This narrative is not just misleading, it is a deliberate distortion of reality designed to paint the privileged as the oppressed, and is a blatant lie with zero evidence to support it and zero data to support it. Because white South Africans, who make up less than 8% of the population, control 85% of the Johannesburg Stock Exchange. Which refugees in the world can claim that they own 85% of the companies that run a certain country? What kind of refugee is that? They own the vast majority of blue chip companies and still control a disproportionate amount of land. 75%, a legacy of apartheid that remains largely unaccounted for and untouched. What refugee can claim that he or she is so under attack in South Africa when they own the majority of the land, the majority of the mines, the majority of the water rights? They own everything. Hulle het alles gevat. Hulle het ons mense doodgemaak. Jy weet, en nou wil hulle sê, hulle is die victims. Nee, hulle is verkeerd. While the majority of our struggle in townships, white suburbs are fortified with private security, electric fences, and luxury estates, this is not marginalization. This is economic dominance by them. How on earth can they go and claim refugee status? Show me where is the white genocide. White people are more protected as a proportion of our population than anybody else in this country because their suburbs are the most protected. So this narrative of white genocide is a fabrication, and crime affects all South Africans. But the brunt of violence is felt in communities like the Cape Flats, Khayelitsha, and Soweto, not in Sandton, Constantia, and Stellenbosch. Hulle maak hulle laat, hulle verstaan nie wat hier aangaan nie, want here in the Cape Flats, this is a war zone, where even the police fear to tread, while private security companies patrol white suburbs with more resources than many local police stations have. So the truth doesn't support this refugee nonsense. And by America taking sides within this establishment of restorative justice, where the land is being restored to the Khoi and San First Nation Aboriginal people and to the African indigenous tribes of the Zulus and the Xhosas. This is our land. We share this land, and we have owned this land since the beginning of time. This is the cradle of humankind. You can't go further back then what's in the Constitution? According to the Constitution, 1913, remember, that's how far we can go back for land claims. We were here for thousands of years by DNA, by archaeology, by historical evidence, DNA evidence, and that's not good enough. These guys still claim that they are the refugees and they have the right to land. How do they have the right to all our land and we have no right to any land as the African Aboriginal people and the African indigenous people? So I want to just say, we have been sold out as Pan-Africanists. We've been sold out for Western loans and neoliberal policies. Our soldiers are grounded, our borders are unprotected, and our First Nation communities remain marginalized. We want to, as MKP, we represent a revolutionary change, not just in rhetoric, but in budget, in policy, in action. We will defend our borders, protect our people, and restore African dignity. Africa is for Africans, sovereignty over servitude and peace with dignity. So, Kaigangans, I thank you all, and thank you, Madam Chair. I'll leave it there for now.
Thank you.
Your network, Chair.
The floor is yours.
Chair, your network. Yeah. Chair, move closer to your device, or your network is bad. We are struggling to hear you.
I think it's your signal. You need to move to outside, closer, Honorable Chair, to the tower or something. You're not audible. It's not the level of the sound. It's the actual connectivity. You're breaking up.
Am I audible now?
Move closer to your device. Yeah, now we are at least it's better.
Yeah, it's a bit better now. Yes.
Okay. May I please just give the first floor?
There it goes again, Honorable Chair.
Okay, may I please just
hear
give
you.
the floor, then I'll just sort out my network issue. Yes, and then I'll
Okay,
just sort
thank
out my
you.
network matters. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Chair. I think you need to find a better space where you can be able to be audible. Okay, fine. Let me thank the opportunity and also thank the presentations and also greet everyone in the platform, our ministers, our DERCO team, and all the honorable members in the platform. I think I will start by reiterating the support and also the effort that is made by the military team within our SADC region in ensuring peace and stability across all the war zones, being it your DRC, where we've seen recently that our South African state have taken a decision to withdraw all the troops in the Goma volatile war zones regions to ensure that there is a peace talks that has been proposed in that particular region to ensure that we silence the gun. I want to reiterate that as the African National Congress, we support this move of withdrawing the troops, more so that there have been misleading headlines and also fueling of tensions that the soldiers were actually there to protect a person interest of a particular leaders in the country. So this is an indication that indeed soldiers were there on a peace mission deployed by SADC with other countries to ensure that there is a remain peace and stability in that part of the region. We're seeing the work that is being done in SADC also being done in Mozambique, where there were very serious volatile situations during the elections there. We've seen the work of the South African ministry in ensuring that there is peace and stability in that particular region, that there are some talks from all parties who are affected so that they come to a conclusion where the people of Mozambique are also safe. So we want to also reiterate that South Africa should remain central to peacemaking in SADC, not only in SADC, but also in other regions like the Sahel regions and any part of the Africa where there are all zones, to ensure that we remain critical in ensuring that we pursue for peace and stability in Africa. Because the battle that is happening in Goma, Chair, if it is left unattended, that particular battle in that side is the battle of resources, which that particular battle can affect the whole of Africa. We are seeing of tensions which are now targeted at our country. We are seeing misleading and well-orchestrated propaganda that is being pursued by the US, most particularly with the recent incident of the Afrikaner in our country, which you can see that is a serious move to believe in their own illusions or their own propaganda that there is indeed an attack on Afrikaner in the country. They are trying by all means to make sure that they put our good country in a wrong footing so that they can pursue their propaganda machinery of ensuring that they bottle us with continued sanction and also affect our economy as we remain central, not only in Africa, but on other part of BRICS and other area where we remain central as the country. So I want to reiterate that the SADC peacemaking mission in the region, together with the UN mission, their intervention is very critical at this moment. We cannot allow the M23 to continue to suffocate the people of the DRC. The team that has been brought together, we have enormous trust in them, and we believe they will push and ensure that there is peace and stability in the region of the DRC. We believe that Goma will be safe and free again through the talks that is happening in that particular area. We believe that that will also allow the humanitarian aid to come to those who are affected through these war zones. This work that is being done by the ministry, as led by the Minister Lamola, it is highly recommended, and we have trust in their team, the work that they are doing. It is a very wonderful work that, as the African National Congress, we reiterate our support to them, that they must continue to make sure that they silence the gun in all the regions and become critical in Africa. The Mozambique, Cabo Delgado tensions are now low. There is a peace talks in that part of the country, and that is the work that has been done by our ministry. At some point, we need to give credit where it is due, rather than always complaining without coming with proper proposals as to how we must then move forward. I think we need to also remind our friends that this is not the ANC-led government. This is the government of national unity, where we are governing this country together for the interest of our country, and to ensure that the country continue to provide necessary support to all the regions which are affected and attacks and all that. So the notion and the misleading of when things are not going well, they say no, the ANC government, it is premature and it must be condemned highly, because we are now in the government of national unity. Yes, yet led by the African National Congress. But when things are going well in this country, we can see that there are isolated particular individuals who should be praised to say, this is the work that is being done by this. But when they believe that they have to make and point fingers, they isolated the African National Congress. So we cannot allow this particular propaganda to prevail. We support the work, and we acknowledge the presentation. We want to reiterate that they should continue ensuring that the team that has been proposed to pursue the peace talks in all these regions where there are volatile situations, they should continue doing that, being supported by the ministry and DERCO and many other actors, the UN and everyone who are here for the peacemaking, to ensure that there is peace and stability in Africa, and all of us, we become central to this particular area so that our people become safe. We must ensure that we strengthen our bond, Chairperson. If we can strengthen our border, that will give us safer and strengthening so that we protect our civilians and ensure that everyone in South Africa is safe. We need to ensure that we speak to the Home Affairs and everyone who is responsible to ensuring that our borders are secure, to make sure that they are strengthened and they are prioritized. You can't be so what will happen with these tensions that are happening in Africa. So we need to also ensure that we prepare ourselves. But like I said, we reiterate our support to DERCO and the ministry. Let them continue pursuing peace and stability in Africa, all regions. South Africa must remain strong. It must be protected. It must not be bullied. We want to have a very serious support that the resources that are found in all regions are the resources that must assist African people so that Africa can become stronger without any intimidation. That will be my submission, Chair. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Honorable Moela. I hope my network has improved. I tried to change my gadgets. You'll just alert me,
you're good, Chair,
Honorable
you're good.
members, if I'm not audible. Honorable Powell.
Thanks, colleague. Just first off, I'd like to just call on the committee secretary, Lubabalo. I would just like to draw your and our honourable colleagues' attention to the rules of parliament. I note that the chairperson, the Honourable Supra Mohammed Pelo, was not able to chair the session. But the Honourable Mohammed Pelo is not empowered by the rules of parliament to unilaterally appoint an acting chairperson. This isn't a dynasty. It's a parliamentary committee governed by rules. So, Lubabalo, in terms of Rule 159 of the Rules of Parliament, it is stipulated that if a chairperson of a committee is absent or unable to perform their functions, the committee must elect another of its members as acting chairperson. So, Lubabalo, as the secretary, could you please just ensure that that process is followed in future? I'm also very glad to hear my ANC colleague admit that this is indeed now a coalition government. And I hope that the Honourable colleague, will indeed listen closely to the DA's recommendations as to what needs to be done to fix the SADC and how we can improve regional government as we move forward in co-governing DIRCO and representing South Africa's interests on the international stage as a coalition government in which no party has an outright majority. Moving on to the subject at hand, this is an important conversation, and I think that it's high time that we addressed the abdication of leadership that has characterized the last 30 years of South Africa's involvement in the SADC, and that we finally address the growing democratic deficit in our region. We'd all agree that the SADC was formed with noble intentions, things like regional cooperation, development, democratic solidarity. But if we look at just basic performance indicators, it's clear that the SADC is paralyzed by institutional weaknesses. It's been hijacked by political elites who see it as a shield against genuine accountability rather than a platform for progress. As a start, the SADC's secretariat lacks any genuine enforcement powers. Its decisions are non-binding, and the executive secretary rarely intervenes in any political or certainly politically sensitive matters. And so, as we've seen and heard, blatant abuses of power continue to go unchallenged, and autocrats in the region continue to be emboldened. If we go back to an Institute for Security Studies study in 2019, it revealed that the SAD takes an average on 18 months to reach any decisions. And if we compare this to other regional bodies like ECOWAS or the EAC, the dysfunction of the SADC is stark. According to the Economist Intelligence Unit's Democracy Index, only 4 of the 16 SADC countries are considered full democracies, and the other 12 are considered either flawed democracies or what they term hybrid regimes. And we know that the close ties amongst former liberation movements in the region, such as the African National Congress, ZANU-PF, FRELIMO, SWAPO, and the MPLA in Angola, pose a significant barrier to the SADC's ability to engage in any meaningful action on behalf of its citizens, because decisions are influenced by liberation movement solidarity rather than the founding principles of the SADC. And for decades, our country, under the former leadership of the ANC, had been at the heart of this rot. If we look at Zimbabwe, I think that case is probably most damning. The 2023 elections in Zimbabwe were not fair, they were not free, they were not credible. And this isn't just a matter of subjective opinion, but it is substantiated by both overwhelming and consistent evidence. The SADC's own election observer mission, in a fairly unprecedented move, openly criticized the elections in Zimbabwe. And they stated in their report that the elections fell short of Zimbabwe's constitutional requirements, their electoral rules, and of course the very SADC principles and guidelines governing democratic elections that all member states are obliged to uphold. We know that ballot papers were withheld in opposition strongholds, particularly in urban areas like Harare and Bulawayo. In some wards, ballot papers arrived upwards of 10 hours late. We know that the Zimbabwe Electoral Commission, which of course acts as an arm of ZANU-PF, rather than an independent body, was part of this stitch-up. Civil society election observers were arrested, they were harassed, and opposition parties faced violent and at times deadly intimidation. We also know that in Zimbabwe, the state media has been weaponized, and opposition access to any airwaves is severely restricted. So despite this avalanche of credible concern from the SADC, the African Union, the European Union, the United Nations observer missions, what did South Africa do under the leadership of the ANC? Well, President Ramaphosa and his foreign minister at the time, Minister Pandor, not only remained silent, but they attended sham President Mnangagwa's inauguration ceremony and sent a clear message to the region that South Africa under the ANC stood with despots, not democracy. And let's also not forget that it was South Africa under the leadership of ex-President Jacob Zuma who joined the campaign led by, I think it was Mugabe, to dissolve the SADC tribunal after it ruled that Mugabe's regime, his crackdown on illegal land seizures was indeed illegal. So by joining this campaign, the ANC under the leadership of ex-President Jacob Zuma overtly aligned itself with repression, and it destroyed one of the only platforms that citizens were able to access in order to mete out justice. And of course, this was later overturned in court, but very little's been done to reestablish the tribunal. Then if we move more recently to Mozambique, the elections there revealed an equally chilling reality: widespread vote tampering, intimidation of domestic and international monitors, alterations to vote tallies at the polling station level, and in a grotesque escalation that all of us will recall, two political advisors to opposition leader Mondlane were in fact assassinated in the days before the results were declared. One of these victims was Alvino Diaz, who was both the lawyer and spokesperson for the Podemos party. And we know that these acts weren't random. They were politically motivated, targeted killings that were sending a very clear signal to dissidents or pro-democracy activists that they were not safe. And Frelimo's reign of terror continued. We know Frelimo also used state security services to silence dissent. And this was particularly brutal in more competitive urban areas. And again, silence from Durko, silence from Pretoria, no condemnation, no democratic or diplomatic rebuke. In fact, again, President Ramaphosa attended the inauguration of the sham president in January this year, accompanied by the incumbent minister for Durko, Minister Lamola, as well as Minister in the Presidency Ntshavheni, on the South African taxpayers' dime. In Tanzania, we know that President Hassan had indeed promised a new era, and the international community for a while was cautiously optimistic, specifically looking to indicators such as her lifting of the ban on opposition rallies about 2 years ago. But in July last year, in the run-up to the election, the mask slipped. The police arrested Chadema, the opposition's top leadership, as well as hundreds of activists who were detained illegally. And their crime was essentially campaigning and specifically planning a Youth Day rally, which was intended to be a peaceful political protest. But the police argued that this would incite public demonstrations. Now, we know that Tanzania was a founding member of the SADC, and yet in the contemporary circumstances, its actions blatantly violate the SADC's treaty's founding principles, and yet there's, once again, no accountability that follows, and our government says nothing. And this is indeed a common thread across all of these crises in which the ANC's diplomatically complicit, because for decades, the ANC viewed the region through the lens of liberation solidarity. And I think that in the contemporary context, that actually extends further than just the continent. So this sort of lens of liberation solidarity trumping democratic principle continues. The ANC's foreign policy remains captive to outdated bonds of the liberation camp. So that's ZANU, PF, Frelimo, the MPLA, SWAPO, the Kremlin, regime. We see it in many of these bonds, Cuba, Havana. But we need to acknowledge that these movements are no longer freedom fighters. They're no longer advocating for the best interests of the people that they claim to represent, in reality, without any legitimate mandate. These are rather ruling elites who use the memory of struggle to capture the state, to loot and pillage the state, to persecute their opponents, and to suffocate any dissent. And by shielding them, the ANC became a barrier to reform, which is why we have been very loud and clear in insisting that given the mandate of the people of this country, that no party has a single outright majority and that our coalition government now operates on the basis of sufficient consensus, the Democratic Alliance will have both a say and a standing on the international stage in advocating for democratic, moral, ethical leadership on the continent in line with international norms and standards. So I'd like our colleagues to listen quite closely, because we have spent a great deal of time, engaging with a variety of analysts from across the South African civil society spectrum in developing a bold and principled SADC reform policy, you could say, that intends to rescue the SADC from its irrelevance. So as part of the national coalition government, which of course, as I say, requires sufficient consensus for all decisions, including those made by DIRCO, we are proposing the following. Firstly, the re-establishment of the SADC tribunal with full authority to hear cases from individuals and enforce rulings independently. The creation of a regional SADC court for human and people's rights, modeled on the African court, with automatic referral mechanisms for gross human rights violations. Now, speaking to some of what the Honourable Douglas said earlier, this would indeed be an African solution to African problems, and it would, I think, give the region greater autonomy. Then thirdly, upgrading the SADC's parliamentary forum into a full regional parliament with legislative oversight, independent electoral monitoring power, and direct citizen participation and engagement. Then ending the consensus-only decision model. This is, of course, to replace the current system with a more weighted voting system, which grants sort of greater clout, you could say, or influence to more populous and more economically significant states. Fifth, to reform the double troika mechanism to stop the abuse by authoritarian states, which would give civil society and opposition parties greater observer status and input into processes. And then ensure that the SADC agreements are indeed domesticated in national law. South Africa has taken some steps to domesticate certain international law. For example, the ICC's Domestication Act, which is, of course, why Russian President Vladimir Putin was not able to physically come to South Africa, because our government, as a result of that domestication, was indeed compelled in law to both issue and transmit an arrest warrant for the indictment on the crime of having kidnapped over 20,000 children. So we're proposing that not just international multilateral bodies be domesticated into law, but in fact SADC agreements be domesticated into national laws in member states, so that governments can be held accountable in their own legal jurisdictions. Then offer significant technical support to strengthen electoral bodies, judiciaries, ombudspeople, as well as the creation of anti-corruption commissions in all member states. And then, of course, we can speak further to things like maritime security and trade, but essentially, overall, to develop strategies and plans to promote intra-regional trade infrastructure, so not just trade agreements themselves, because we already do a significant amount of trade within the region, but to create the necessary infrastructure to reduce non-tariff barriers, which will, of course, foster economic growth. And we know that when countries are economically strong and individual citizens are able to prosper, that stability, democracy, and peace flow from economic prosperity. So I think that it's high time that South Africa once again assumes its position as a principled leader on the continent instead of an apologist for dictators. Because it's clear that the people of this region, specifically the people of Zimbabwe, Mozambique, the DRC, Tanzania, they don't need handshakes and photo ops, but they need those of us charged with governing these nations to act, to defend democracy. And it's high time that we move away from paying regional governance platitudes whilst our leaders rub shoulders with warlords and dictators. That's all for me for now. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Honorable Paul. Honorable Makubela.
Good morning, Chair. Thank you so much for the opportunity to present today, and I greet my colleagues, the officials, and also welcome the presentation that we have been given today. Chairperson, I want to start by addressing the issue of which stems from the challenges that were outlined by the presenter. He spoke about limited peace and security troops, armed conflicts. He spoke about political crisis, governance deficits, and democracy, which were very, very critical in the SADC region. Now, when we talk about vote rigging and instability of democracy and political crisis, it's important, Chairperson, that we don't even look far. We start here in our own backyard. The South African 2024 national elections were a mess. It was a crisis that I'm not sure why my colleague went to quote other countries instead of talking about the vote rigging that happened in this election. If these elections were free and fair and reflected the will of the South Africans, we know that MK Party and many other parties would have made it to the government. I don't believe that the democracy that we enjoy in South Africa is a true democracy. We are not governing this nation by the will of the people. We are governing this nation by the will of the white monopoly capital, the cartels that are controlling the economy of this nation. We are governing this nation right now in a crisis called Government of National Unity. And I'm sure my colleagues have heard both the ANC and the DA, when they step into this platform over and over again, it's an abuse of our time, it's an abuse of these forums where you come and air your dirty laundry, you're firing at each other. And we hate to be marriage counselors for something that we don't even understand how it started in the first place. This democracy of ours has been hijacked. And my question to this SADC organ is, what are you going to do about it? Clearly, South Africa is in a political crisis. When 26 parties that participated in the elections came together in a national platform, dare I say international platform, led by MK Party, who's uniting all of these forces right now, saying we have been rigged. These elections were not free and fair. We've got proof that we can show you, approaching the courts, and the courts are slamming it down. We have a crisis. We have a deficit of democracy. And dare we come here and paint as if being a particular party or particular government of national unity makes us holier than thou, than any African country. We are not different from Zimbabwe. We are not. We are not different from what is happening in DRC. What makes us different? The only thing is that we've got a captured media and a captured judiciary. Now, the SADC said in their presentation, they have an early warning system. And I have a serious concern and questions around this early warning system. If indeed we have an early warning system, by now this organ should be advising South Africa and SADC on the political crisis that is looming. The people from whom the votes were stolen must not be pushed to go and protest over and over again, must not be pushed to go and vent out their anger and frustrations in manners that are not becoming. We need this body to intervene and resolve the issue of the stolen votes. Because this democracy as it stands is hijacked. It is not a democracy. And your early warning system as SADC should be telling us about the root causes, your preventative measure, the risks that you have picked up. You say in your presentation, most of the issues that create conflict and instability in the SADC region, they come from domestic sources. However, you place a limitation as well to say you cannot interfere in domestic measures, which we understand. We know that there's a sovereignty, every state, every nation enjoys its own sovereignty and we want to promote that. But how are you balancing that sovereignty coupled with what you pick up in your early warning as intelligence and signs of potential conflict within a nation? And how do you then intervene to prevent such conflict? My colleagues who spoke before mentioned different conflicts that we can name again. We've got conflicts that are coming from conflicts in how we manage our mineral resources. Our mineral resources have been hijacked. We've got conflict in terms of how we are managing our migration policies, we are managing our borders. And those are some of the root causes that have been destabilizing not just South Africa, not just the SADC region, but the whole of Africa. But most importantly, we've got this political conflict. We've got an illegitimate government in South Africa. How is the SADC going to intervene and recommend on what needs to be done to resolve this conflict? Now, one of the concerning matters for us as MK is that since 2011, the SADC body has been relying a lot on South Africa. South Africa, when they took over the chairpersonship, they didn't rely on the funding and the resources of SADC. They went internally and used our own resources, our own infrastructure to assist the region. But now you can see how that has crippled South Africa domestically. We saw it in how the DRC matter was handled, and we welcome the withdrawal of the troops. Now the question is, how is SADC going to carry its own weight, given the large responsibility that it carries for this region? The concern is that your funding and budgets, they come from donors. And these are international donors. And how independent is this body given the source of its funding? And how do these funders interact and relate with the functioning and the operations of this organ in truly maintaining peace and stability within the region? I also want to understand around the regional and harmonizing of some of the policies that the different SADC states have, so that there is truly understanding in terms of how we manage migration, how we address the porous borders that are affecting especially South Africa. One of my colleagues from MK and also from EFF, they spoke about the inflooding of drugs through our borders. And these are not just drugs that are coming in. These are serious cartels that are meant to destabilize our peace, meant to destabilize the nation, and to influence the ideological direction of the nation. These are not accidental things that are happening. Military camps that cannot be accounted for. What is SADC doing about those things? We also have this flooding of spaza shops in our most fragile communities owned by foreigners. We know that these are networks of surveillance. These are being established as networks to destabilize the country. These are geopolitical agents, most of them. And thousands of spaza shops everywhere in critical, vulnerable communities in our nation. As part of your early warning signs and your intelligence as SADC, how are we dealing with these hubs that keep mushrooming on a daily basis? Chairperson, South Africa is in a war. It's a silent war that is happening, and we're at the front line of this war. This geopolitical war is an undercurrent that is undermining our sovereignty. My colleague spoke about the migration of the 49. And I want to ask SADC, what is their assessment of this migration? What is the SADC community now and this organ saying around this? Because this is not just a mere economic migration. It's not a humanitarian refugee who's fleeing something in the country. There's no genocide in South Africa. Yet this organ of SADC is quiet. If there was genocide in South Africa, this organ should have been the first respondent. When there's an accusation like that in a member state, this organ should equally have been the first to raise its hand and defend South Africa in terms of its role in SADC and what you know is happening in the country. But I worry about the funders of SADC. I worry if indeed you are funded by international bodies, and how influential are they to your voice and to your work. We're experiencing a coordinated erosion of our sovereignty as South Africa using misinformation. And these people that are leaving, Chairperson, it must be noted that this is part of the infiltration strategy and intelligence gathering for South Africa. We know, like all the other countries in Africa, that we've got compromised mineral resource management strategies. People that are masquerading as investors are really the new silent colonizers. They've captured our logistics. We have underfunded, poorly surveilled, corrupt borders. Yet, Chairperson, our minerals can be transported out speedily and securely. There's no issues in getting minerals out. But we have issues in managing drugs coming in. Chairperson, we have parties within this government of national unity which have really weaponized the domestic policies of South Africa. They've tarnished the image of South Africa globally. What we have been doing as a nation for the past 30 years, they are seeking to redress in this tenure of the government of national unity. There's a violent effort that is happening right now to reverse the BEE policies, to reverse the land policies, to reverse, to implement dual citizenship, to change our immigration laws. But SADC has early warning, and I keep repeating that, because these are things that this organ should have been able to pick up and should have been able to advise. Because if SADC is not aware, this is a potential political conflict brewing. If this continues and the people of South Africa cannot get their land back, they cannot get their minerals back, they cannot control their own destiny, if the people of South Africa continue to be marginalized, continue to be undermined, as you have heard here, by people who don't even see themselves as part of South Africa or Africans in general, who are ready now with dual citizenship to jump ship whenever a challenge would occur in the country. We don't have that luxury. We don't have an invitation from the United States to jump ship and go to Idoa or wherever it is that they are. We are here to stay. And if we have to fight for our birthright, our land, our traditional leaders, it will get to that stage because of the attitudes of this government of national unity. They are constantly pissing on the blood of our forefathers. The condescending attitude of trying to tell us how SADC should be running in this platform. We have no issues with suggestions, with recommendations that are brought properly, and people can engage with them with agreement. But there are no gods who own wisdom and intelligence. And we cannot be told by somebody from outside how African Pan-Africanism, African solutions should look like. We reject them. We reject them with the contempt that it deserves. If we are going to have our own African solutions, it will not be from somebody from the Democratic Alliance standing in this committee telling us how to run SADC. We will go down to our traditional leaders, to our people. We'll go down to the communities where this thing hits the ground, where our people are affected by all of this unemployment, mineral rights that are being stolen every day. Our people are poor, they're languishing in poverty. Our children have no jobs, they have no schools, they don't even have an option to jump ship and go overseas. We will go down to those people and ask them, how do they want SADC to run its affairs? How do they want us, whom they have elected to be in this position, to represent them in SADC? It will not be a top-down approach. And this is why we are telling you, SADC, that there is no democracy. It has failed. This is not a government of the people by the people. This is a government of the elite, the know-it-all, the white supremacy, the white monopoly capital that is coming to tell you today how to do your affairs, to run your affairs. If your early warning signal did not tell you what you are coming to receive today, I hope you have heard by yourselves that there's a conflict brewing in South Africa. There's a lapse of democracy, lapse of governance in South Africa. I don't know how far your mandate reaches. You said that there are about, I think it's 4 to 6 best governed nation in this SADC region. And I'm wondering, when you say that top 6 or top 4, is South Africa part of that? How do you rate when you say a best governed country? Is it because they have managed to have an election and people were silenced because the media is captured, the judiciary is captured, and people have to comply? Or is it because there are jobs created? People are happy, they are sharing in the prosperity and the wealth of the country. Every man, every woman has land and they can cultivate and they can take their children to school safely, securely. What is it that you define as best governed countries beyond holding an election that is deemed to have followed a democratic process, in your view? Because South Africa clearly violated every democratic process in these 2024 elections. Otherwise, we would not be sitting with a government of national unity and trying to make sense of what is it that they want to do together, because they just seem to be just in crisis mode all the time. We're sitting without a budget as a nation because of this so-called government of national unity. It's a crisis. And this crisis will destabilize the whole of SADC if not managed. It has that potential. Chairperson, My next question, how is SADC dealing with this new breed of ideological cartels and geopolitical agents that are leaving the country, that are also entering through things like spaza shops, etc., that I have mentioned? How are we dealing with these foreign footprints in our fragile communities? Because they are no longer only in metros, they are everywhere. Our country is under siege, seriously under siege. Those who have sworn to protect this country, those who have sworn to protect the SADC region, are the ones who are selling it. How else do you explain the government of national unity? Where is the national unity? What is it that they want to accomplish? In all of this, the sad thing is that the voice of SADC is missing. The voice of this organ is missing. We've seen when President Trump attacks Ukraine, we've seen countries like UK, Germany, and others rallying behind Ukraine, going show solidarity. We haven't seen any of the SADC countries coming to rally behind South Africa in the face of this war with President Trump, with our own government, the so-called government of national unity. Chair, I think some of the issues that I have put in here, my colleague from MK has covered them extensively, so I'm not going to labor on them. And I want to reiterate that there are no reforms that are going to be discussed here unless these reforms have been brought to us from the ground, from where the people who love this nation, who fought for this nation, whose sons and daughters and grandmothers, grandfathers, mothers and fathers died for this nation, are given an opportunity to have their say in how SADC should run. Do not be under pressure. Do not be bullied. Do not be intimidated. No one is going to be patronizing anybody here. You do your job. If there are reforms that needs to be done, we will take them to the ground and we'll bring the recommendations here. It's not going to come from top down. There's no owners of intelligence and wisdom, especially if they are stealing votes to be in power and hanging on to everything just to be in power, even though the relationship is broken down and not working, and the country is left without a budget. Our children are not at school. Collapsing municipalities. We have no water as we sit here. There's no electricity. Yet this, what I will quote is those charged to govern. Those who are charged to govern by who? Who has charged my colleague to be governing when you did not win elections? Governing means first and foremost, the domestic policies must be upheld. Domestically, the country must be working. It must be productive. The children of the country must be productive before you run to please foreign agents and foreign relations. Our concern is not to be politically correct with foreigners, is to be politically, economically correct and morally correct with our people who have voted us to represent them in this parliament. I thank you, Chairperson.
Thank you, Honorable Makubela, and thank you, honorable members, for your engagements. Before I give SALO the platform, mine is just to put an emphasis and rather commend as one of the recommendations the political approach addressing root causes and transparency management, which was cited, which is very critical. You know, we find ourselves once again where we are witnessing the intensification of conflict in regions such as the DRC and Mozambique, which are driven in large part by both regional and foreign actors whose involvement has not only served to deepen instability, but it continues to really trickle the South African government efforts to support the peace and security in those areas. So I think it's very important that and essential that we adopt a more intentional and principled approach when dealing with this, because we have many external actors, some who are our friends, who are fueling these tensions and funding and aiding some of these warring parties. And it just makes all our efforts really a rather fruitless exercise. So I think we must work through multilateral frameworks, not only through the AU and the UN, but we need to find other ways and work with more bodies to identify and expose those external and internal forces exacerbating these crises. I think diplomatic ties or strategic alliances should not shield any actor from accountability. We need punitive measures which we must follow if we are intentional about our efforts, and they must be enforced with consistency and integrity. You know, when institutions fail to act decisively or worse, contribute to the destabilization of already fragile regions, they undermine not only the sovereignty of the affected states, but also the legitimacy of our regional and continental peace efforts. So I think as South Africa, we must lead with clarity and demand accountability and ensure that our interventions yield tangible and lasting results, you know, and we must not be subjected to rhetoric only. And also military deployment will not bring a lasting solution other than pacify the situation. So we need more strategic initiated diplomatic processes, which I think we must support. Other than that, I'll give SALO the platform just to answer any questions of clarity or just comment on some of the inputs. The floor is yours, Mr. Somi and your colleagues.
Thank you so much, Honorable Chairperson, for giving us the platform. So I wish that we were SADC as SALO, but we're just a small think tank and NGO that is looking and analyzing these issues in the hopes of assisting you as members of parliament, along with other policymakers in making the correct decisions that not only align with the foreign policy of South Africa, but also aligned with the principles, treaties, protocols that are underpinning our regional and continental makeup. So I hope that clarifies that. So let me start off with the issue of migration. At the creation of the Organization of African Unity, and along with the subsequent iteration, the African Union, Article 4 always defined that African countries would sustain the borders that they have since their independence from either colonialism or apartheid. And part and parcel of this was to prevent any form of territorial conflicts that might emerge. However, that has resulted in some territorial disputes amongst various nations and peoples, as those colonial borders were arbitrarily drawn in Germany at the Berlin Conference. So with that understanding, and with that a formulation of understanding of how the borders were created within the SADC region, we must also understand how also migration also operationalized. Before the formal creation of the state of South Africa back in 1910 from independence from Great Britain, migration had already manifested within Southern Africa, and that intensified with the discovery of natural resources as regional value chains started manifesting. However, this migration was also there during the pre-colonial period, where people moved between what is now called these colonial borders. Therefore, migration itself should not be deemed as an unnatural situation, but should be deemed as a natural occurrence within the African continent. However, how we manage this issue of migration is very critical in addressing the issues some of the MPs highlighted here. And this speaks to the push factors that result in migration. I highlighted a number of security threats that are emerging within the SADC region, others being internal displacement as a result of climate change-related natural disasters, others is migration as a result of economic challenges. But fundamentally, the root cause of a lot of migration within this region is caused by national instability, along with as a result of political or electoral processes, along with electoral violence or general violence that is made out within those populations, and therefore you have this general displacement of people. Unless you address the root causes of that, migration into countries such as South Africa will never be stopped, no matter how tall you build any borders in this nation. So how we need to conceptualize migration in this instance is how do we now utilize migration as a means towards development of the region. The African Continental Free Trade Agreement, along with the Agenda 2063, lays it out correctly, along with the creation of the people-to-people protocol on people-to-people movement protocol that is attached towards the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, which this Parliament should be holding our government accountable to. Those aspects all feed into how do we now collectively, as a region, manage the situation of migration. And part of the debates that this Parliament, along with the national government, in the upcoming national dialogues, if they happen, is how much sovereignty do we need to succeed towards creating a better region? For example, how much sovereignty do we need to succeed to say, look, how do we collectively work on peace and security operations, fully realizing that there's a national need, and how do we now progress on that? How do we collectively build regional integration infrastructure in order for us to find true trade and movement of our people? How do we now digitize and make secure the people-to-people movement to prevent transnational crimes, to prevent human trafficking, to prevent illicit financial flows stemming from the region and the continent? So these are the critical questions that this Parliament needs to deliberate within itself and create legislation that is accompanied towards your contributions, not only to the Pan-African Parliament, but the emergent SADC Parliament itself. Because those are two critical institutions that this Parliament can have its intervention in concerning these various regional issues, in order for us to build consensus within the broader regional framework. The secondary aspect is, how do we now domesticate the objectives and the values that are enshrined within the SADC Treaty? Because upon its creation, our forebears realized that the region itself, each and every single individual country, due to the arbitrary nature of the creation of our borders, they will need a unified effort in order for us to develop our region, including how we manage the peace and security situation. Unless we address how do we now build consensus within this region, including how this Parliament engages with its peers in institutions such as the Pan-African Parliament, along with the emergent SADC Parliament, is very critical too. The G20, the P20 itself, is in another critical engagement group underneath the G20 framework that this Parliament may engage on finding solutions on what do parliamentaries think and how to resolve issues such as debt, because that impacts on even how we deploy our peace and security operations, as we're undercapacitated within our fiscal space to deal with issues such as creating newer technologies for the South African National Defence Force. How do we now capacitate regional counterparts to push out insurgents, and how do we now build the political will within this region, not only to develop, but to also create a security infrastructure that is cognizant of the emerging security challenges, such as extremism itself, which will require a human developmental mandate, which takes into consideration human security at its heart. So this Parliament itself has important deliberations to make, including one important aspect that Honorable Powell raised was of the SADC Tribunal. There is a resuscitation now of the SADC Tribunal called the SADC Administrative Tribunal. However, that is not far enough. This Parliament itself has premised its notions on accountability in terms of state actors, In the next iteration, this parliament should be pushing our national government for the recreation of the SADC tribunal in order for us to enhance citizenry voice in terms of our state actions, in terms of their adherence towards SADC treaties and protocols. And that also speaks to how do we now create enforcement mechanisms within the current framework and transform those enforcement mechanisms to create external pressure on state actors to advance in terms of the Agenda 2063, and especially concerning the developmental indexes highlighted there. And part and parcel of that is this parliament's role, and not only just rhetoric on these various matters that impact South Africa, but to also realize that South Africa itself cannot develop as an island. When you look at the current countries that have speedily industrialized over the last 2 decades, right? It's mostly in the Asian and Latin American states. All of them have created regional supply chains and value chains, coupled with people-to-people movement, coupled with industrial and knowledge sharing amongst regional actors, coupled with industrialization zones. We, as the African continent, even within this African Continental Free Trade Agreement, we have failed to even domesticate some of the prerequisites for us to even implement intra-Africa trade. And that's why in the recent CEO Africa meeting, African businesses, not domestic international businesses, no, African businesses, only 17% of them have faith in the success of the African Continental Free Trade Area. And some burden has to lay on the legislative bodies they have to hold governments accountable, and they have to create legislation that enable government to achieve these things. And finally, we as SALO commit ourselves to continue having these dialogues and research in order to inform policymakers like yourselves, in order for us to make the reality of Agenda 2063 a reality. And it will take a concerted effort, not just from us as NGOs and think tanks, but from government, policymakers such as yourselves, and even business, including the people on the ground, to understand that these mechanisms themselves, even though the thought themselves, they had grassroots impact in the thinking, we are the stumbling blocks in order for them to make it to be a reality. So we must start thinking critically, how do we now make this a more peaceful continent? How do we now coordinate amongst ourselves? Because it's very futile in this current international context, where certain international actors that created the rules-based orders are now actively breaking it. And we as the Global South speak only in our silos and individual nation countries, whilst other actors with development at their hearts speak collectively. So we have 1.4 to 5 billion people on this continent. That's around the population of China. And unless we speak collectively as Africans on these pertinent issues, we will forever be left in the back burners of history, and with us having a ball of begging to the international community. So I'd like to thank this Parliament for giving us this opportunity to engage with members of Parliament, and I will look forward for further engagements with Parliament. Thank you so much, Comrade Chairperson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Somya. Honorable members, that is the input from SALO. I don't know if there are any follow-ups from members. Okay, I'll take that as a no. Honorable members, thank you very much, Mr. Somya, once again. Honorable members, as we draw this important meeting to a close, I want to sincerely thank each of you for your thoughtful contributions and unwavering commitment to the agenda of peace and stability in our region. I think you, even though the meeting, in the absence of the chair, you managed to focus on the progress and outcomes of the meeting, which was more constructive. Today's discussions have not only shed light on the complex dynamics driving conflict in the DRC and parts of the SADC region, but more importantly, they've presented some concrete and actionable solutions which can be implemented. I think it is clear that while the challenges are significant, our collective resolve is much more important. You know, the strategies or rather suggestions proposed today, ranging from the strengthened regional cooperation and targeted interventions to enhance accountability mechanisms, must now be translated into coordination and action. I think it's the responsibility of this portfolio committee to ensure that it is actioned. You know, people cannot afford for these engagements to remain only on paper. So I think it's our responsibility to ensure and persuade these policies to be in existence and also be implemented. So I think let us ensure that the outcomes of this meeting are not the end, but rather the beginning of a sustained, impactful engagement. You know, South Africa, along with our regional partners, remains fully committed to supporting peace building, inclusive dialogue, and long-term stability. So thank you once again to the Southern African Liaison Organization for coming and providing this insightful information. And thank you once again to all the honorable members for your contributions. I think your insights and dedication will ensure that we move forward as this committee. And I think it's definitely, once again, our responsibility to ensure that these engagements do not remain here, but are actioned by our government. Let us move forward with unity and urgency and purpose and continue the work we were elected to come and do here in Parliament. Thank you once again, honorable members. The meeting is adjourned.
Long live Chairperson. Thank you.
Long live the chair.
Thank you,
Forward
Chair.
to GNU. Forward to GNU. Thank you.
Gwaza Mkonto, Gwaza.
Kwaza
Thank you, Chair. Viva
Mkonto, the new
Ultraman,
government in
viva.
waiting. We are coming for you.
Keep
See you
coming,
guys.
you're gonna fail. Bye, guys.
Bye.
Bye.
Mr. Siguela, can you close the meeting?